We're going to be discussing trigonometry today, and since you are having to work from home, I'm going to be using the Desmos app to do my trigonometric calculations because not everybody has a graphing calculator at home. If you would rather use a graphing calculator, you might want to peek at the videos that are in the module for Unit 5, and I'm sure that I have in the video there using the actual graphing calculator, but I know everybody has access to Desmos. So the first thing I want us to do is to look at the Desmos app just for a moment, and we're going to make sure that you are in degree mode. We didn't necessarily talk about this ever before, but there's different ways of measuring angles. You can measure angles in degrees or in radians. When you get into pre-cal, they'll start using radians, but we are going to be using degrees. So if you push the little wrench icon that is in the top corner of the Desmos app, it gives you some settings. At the bottom, you'll see radians and degrees. You need to choose degrees there. The default for every calculator is radians, so make sure you go to degree mode. If you ever want to test that you're in degree mode, sine of 30 is 1/2, and you can check that, see where it says functions in the buttons at the bottom for the Desmos app. Pick functions, pick sine, and then type 30. And if you get 0.5, you're all good and you are in the right format. So we're going to talk about trigonometric ratios. These are just ratios of the sides of right triangles, and that's what I'm just going to put there. Sorry for the clicking. That's the Apple Pen on the iPad, and there's no real way to get around that noise that you're hearing. The first steps for using trigonometry are to, first of all, we're always going to be using one of the acute angles as a reference angle. And so we've labeled them in these images with the Greek letter theta. And we're going to just label these triangles based off of those two angles. I like to call these reference angles. So in the first triangle, we're going to label the parts, and you're always going to use 3 terms for the pieces. You have opposite, adjacent, and hypotenuse. And these are how we're going to label the sides of the triangle with relation to theta. So opposite from it is across from it. It is the side that does not touch it. The adjacent side is the side that is next to the angle. It is forming the angle, but it is not the hypotenuse. And then the hypotenuse is always across from the right angle. It's critical that you're able to label the sides, or at least think of what these sides are in relation to your reference angle. And when we're solving problems today, we will actually know what that angle is if we're going to find the sides, but for now we're just labeling. So the triangle on the right here, using angle F as our reference angle, side DE is the opposite side, side FE is the adjacent side, and side FD is the hypotenuse. So we have those labels. So the sine ratio, which in the calculator they abbreviate with SIN, and when we're doing our work, we'll use that abbreviation. But you want to say the actual word sine when you are referring to this. And the sine of an angle, which I'm going to use theta for my angle, the ratio for sine is the opposite over the hypotenuse. The ratio for cosine of theta is the adjacent over the hypotenuse. And the ratio for tangent of theta is the opposite over the adjacent. So these are some things that you'll need to memorize for solving trig problems. You'll have to memorize that the sine of an angle is the ratio of opposite over hypotenuse. The cosine of an angle is the ratio of the adjacent over hypotenuse. And the tangent of an angle is the ratio of the opposite over adjacent. There is a couple of ways to memorize these. Some people memorize the word SOHCAHTOA, SOHCAHTOA. But I'm a terrible speller, so I cannot use that method for me. I think of a phrase to help me know the ratios, and I write it like I did this upper part here, but I just kind of abbreviate. So I write like this. And I write that on my paper all the time when I'm doing my work, and I think of a phrase as I write it down, and I thought of it as I was writing it down just now, but it's pretty silly. But for sine, it starts, this SOH is some old horse, and then caught another horse for the cosine part, and for the tangent part, taking oats away. So it's like a horse stealing food from another horse. Some old horse caught another horse taking oats away. And, you can make up your own phrase to remember that, but this is going to be very important for pre-calculus, and so we definitely want you to think of how you can remember that for when you get to pre-cal. We're just going to start with some ratios, and so for the first problem here, we are finding tangent of A and tangent of B. So for the tangent of A is my reference angle. And the tangent of A, which we're just going to write as a ratio, the tangent of A should be the opposite over the adjacent with relation to angle A. Opposite from angle A is the 45. And adjacent to angle A is the 28. And so you just want to reduce this fraction if possible. And it doesn't reduce. So tangent of A is 45 over 28. And then for tangent of B, you're going to look at angle B, and you're going to think with relation to B, opposite and adjacent. So related to angle B is 28 as opposite from it, and adjacent to it is the 45. And you reduce that if possible. So looking at the next one, we're going to look at the sine ratio. So the sine of R, so here is R, and the sine is opposite over hypotenuse. Opposite from R is 15, and the hypotenuse is 25. And so the sine of R, you want to reduce this, and they can reduce by 5, giving you 3/5. So the ratio for the sine of R is 3/5. Now we're going to look at the sine of S. Sine of S is opposite and hypotenuse for angle S. So opposite from S is the 20, and the 25 is the hypotenuse again. And so the sine of S is going to be 4/5. Practicing these ratios is really important just to help you identify tangent, sine, and cosine in an image to help you set up your problems for solving. Some of the questions are just going to ask you to write the ratios. Some of them we're going to need the ratios in order to find angles or find sides. On this next one, we're going to do cosine of A and cosine of B. So here's A, and cosine is adjacent over hypotenuse, so that's going to be 48 is the adjacent side, and the hypotenuse is 52. And then 48 divided by 52 reduced is 12/13. So the cosine of A is 12/13. For cosine of B, we're going to start up here with B, and we're going to use the adjacent and the hypotenuse to angle B, and the adjacent is 20 and the hypotenuse is 52. And so 20 divided by 52 reduces to 5/13. So the cosine of B is 5/13. So here's what you're going to do if you're just asked to write the ratio. If you're asked to solve